Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Art in the Wild. I'm back. It has been quite some time, and I'm actually re-recording this recap episode. I recorded one like 4 weeks ago, something like that. But I had to re-record it because so much stuff has happened in between now and then that I couldn't just leave it out. So, yeah, but this is just going to be recapping all the stuff that's happened with me since November, which is when I posted my last episode, which is kind of crazy. Essentially what I'm doing with the podcast right now is, I've always struggled with procrastination, right? It's been an issue pretty much as long as I've been alive. And when I was going to publish this podcast, right, I had been talking about making one for like 6-7 months before that, right? Just talking about, I'm going to make a podcast. And I'm like, screw this. I'm not procrastinating anymore. I'm just going to do it. And I just kind of threw it out into the world, which was great because I got it done, right? No, action beats thinking 100% of the time. But the issue was I didn't build up a backlog or anything. So I just kind of started putting out episodes as I recorded them. And the issue with this is, like, if I have a week where I can't get an episode out or a month where I can't get an episode out, then there's just not going to be an episode being put out on that week or that month, right? So now what I should have done in the beginning and what I'm doing now is making a backlog, right? So I've filmed so far, I've done, let me think, including this one, I've done 3 others. So yeah, this is the 4th episode that I've recorded. Then I've got one I'm recording in a few days, and then that'll be my backlog of 5, which was my goal. And then the goal from there on out is going to be posting weekly and building up episodes as I go along and using that backlog as kind of a buffer if I ever need to fall back on it, where I can, have a few weeks where I'm insulated and I don't have to record an episode every single week. And then I can just grind it out one week and do like 2 or 3 and then keep that schedule going, right? But yeah, this winter was crazy for me. A lot of stuff happened. It was weird because a lot of the winter was not rich in terms of actual encounters. Like, I was not having a lot of encounters with animals throughout the duration of the winter, but the encounters that I did have were pretty insane, right? And I took 2 trips to Florida, one of them like a week ago, and then one of them about a month ago now, a little more than a month ago. Both of them were incredible trips. I'll talk about that a little bit. The eclipse was insane. Yeah, so, I'll just dive into all of that. But after I posted that last episode in November, I think it was Josh Hauga's episode, really not a lot was happening. This owl season was weird. It was really good for, like, short-eared owls, right? And long-eared owls, it was really good for those. But, dude, snowy owls, like, didn't exist this year. I didn't see a single one. That broke, like, my 10-year record of seeing a snowy owl every single winter. And then this year, I didn't get eyes on a single snowy, which is weird because the year before, last year, too, was also really bad. I only saw, like, 2 the entire winter, maybe 3, right? So I'm hoping we should see like an eruption one of these years coming up. If not, it's actually going to be pretty concerning because it seems like the numbers of owls coming down south is really dwindling, right? So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, so snowy owls were a no-go, right? But one thing that it did have happen was I went out to visit my grandparents in Indiana, right? So I took a road trip out there with my mom and my sister, and while I was out there, I was actually able to hit up this spot for short-eared owls. I'd found it on the internet, and, I was keeping tabs on it, but I hadn't really dug deep into the location and the specifics of it. And then I pull it up, while I'm actually in my grandparents' house in Indiana, and I see that reported that they had seen 14 short-eared owls at this one spot. So I'm like, screw this. Like, I have to go to this place. This is ridiculous, right? So I showed up there. It took a little bit to find the owls. I think it was just they hadn't come out yet. Saw a bunch of harriers, saw a bunch of rough-legged hawks. It was at a mine. It wasn't it wasn't like a birding area. It wasn't a national wildlife refuge. It was a straight up mine. And then there was these massive like mining trucks, like something out of Star Wars, like this ridiculous vehicle. The wheels had like 10-foot diameters. So that was all crazy, right? But we're driving around this area and eventually I did find some owls. And then after I found the first 2 or so, just the place blew up. They were everywhere. They were just flying out of the grass. They were hunting the hills. Like, you could stand in one place and then turn around and see 7 and then drive to a different part of the property and then see another 5 or so all in one area. I mean, the whole encounter was just insane. And driving out of it, driving through the dirt roads, like post sunset, they would be shooting out of the grass like freaking grasshoppers or crickets. They would just shoot out and fly away. And the whole thing was incredible. And I'm pretty sure I heard a barn owl too. Not positive on that. It didn't call twice, but I'm like 95% sure. That whole thing was really awesome. And then, so that was December, right around Christmas, actually right at Christmas time, pretty much. And then after that, not a lot happened until mid-January, late January, I want to say. Like, literally nothing happened. It was, pretty dry. And I was in Walmart. I know this sounds random, but it'll make sense in a second. I'm on the phone with one of my friends, right, Felix, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do this weekend. Like, we were trying to go shoot somewhere and hang out, but, like, there was nothing to do. And then all of a sudden he goes, I think people are seeing a northern hawk owl in Maine. I'm like, that's cap. There's no way. Like, absolutely not. If you don't know, like, a northern hawk owl, it's a very northern species, and having them in the Northeast is tough, right? It's even more difficult than, say, like a great gray owl or something like that. So I was like, no, that's wild, right? And so he sends me these screenshots that people are posting on a forum, and there's no location on this, right? There's no specific spot. They're just like, there's a northern hawk owl. They've been posted recently. The locations are protected though. And I was like, okay, we might need to try for this, right? Because I had seen 2 northern hawk owls, both of them out in Minnesota, but they weren't really good looks. They were really far away. The photos were, atrocious. Like, they were just not good at all. So, being able to see one closer and especially in New England would be a massive plus, right? So Felix did some digging, found a possible location that might be where the owl is, right? We didn't know for sure, but on a whim, we're like, screw it, we'll drive 3.5 hours north into Maine to go photograph this bird. So we went up there, I think 2 days later. We're driving up and we get to the road. We left at like 4:40 or something crazy like that, right? We wanted to be there at sunrise. So we get to the place and I'm giving it like a 98% chance that the bird's just not going to be there, right? I'm like, I didn't think it was going to be there. I thought it was going to be a fun trip up north and then maybe we'd go out and find like some Bohemian waxwings or a barred owl or something. But we're driving down this road and suddenly, he just interrupts me. I was talking to him and he just goes, are those cars, right? So there's these two cars that are kind of in the road. And I'm like, yeah, they're probably driving or something. He goes, are they stopped? Right? So I look a little closer and they're both stopped. They're not moving. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe they're just like talking to each other. That could be. And then I see that there's someone standing outside of one of the cars with the door open. And I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, we might have hit the jackpot actually. And then I see they're holding a big camera pointing up at something. And then we get a little closer and I see there's this perfectly crow-sized blob just sitting on top of a telephone pole. And then I just got super happy. Like, I didn't think we were going to find it. And to be able to see such a rare bird in New England, was really a treat, right? So we got out of the car. There was a small group of birders there and we were, hanging out with them. And then suddenly the owl flew towards the group of people, flew over us. It wasn't like flying at us and landing near us, or something like that. But flew over our group about 10 feet over us and then landed on a telephone pole, like 3 telephone poles down or something like that. And it, like, that was insane. I've never had an encounter like that. And it was like 5 minutes after we had gotten there. So we watched it for a little bit, and then me and Felix went to go get waffles because, priorities. It was a great place. I think it was called like Love and Waffles or something like that. I don't know. I'm gonna look this up. Give me a second. I'm gonna cut to 10 seconds in the future when I have the name of this place. Yeah, okay. Peace, Love, and Waffles. Dude, the place was great. If you ever find yourself in kind of like mid/northern Maine near Peace, Love, and Waffles, go check it out. It was awesome. No, but we went to go get food. And then we came back to go see the owl, and there was like a ton of cars there, right? We got super nervous. We're like, crap, this place is going to blow up. It's going to be a disaster, yada, yada, yada. But everyone that was there was a birder, right? And, there wasn't really a lot of photographers. So it went from like, there was like 10 cars, and then went to like 9, and then 7, and then 5, and then 3, and then just 2 cars left, and everyone just kind of left. And that was within like a 10-minute time frame, right? So there was these 2 cars that were left, and they were both photographers, and me and Felix were hanging back like 100 yards, right? We weren't sure how the owl was with people. We didn't really know how it was behaving. We didn't want to be all up close to it and causing it to flush and then getting like attacked on Facebook for being unethical, evil people, or whatever. You know how that goes, right? But we watched this owl suddenly dive down into the snowbank right next to the 2 photographers, take off, and then fly directly down their lens, like right over their head, buzz them, and then landed on the telephone pole. So we're like, screw this. Like, we're getting closer. This is ridiculous, right? So we show up, we start talking to the photographers. They got incredible flight shots of the bird. And then after that, they left. And like people really weren't showing up. I mean, occasionally a birder would come through, but it got to a point where me and Felix were by ourselves with this bird for like hours, like 2.5 hours, right? And the craziest event of the day happened where I'm kind of standing really close to this bird at this point because it just does not care. And nobody's there. Felix is in the car warming up. And then I went up to northern Maine in the middle of winter, and it was cold. It was probably like 20-something. Mid-20s, low 20s. And I didn't bring a winter coat because that's an intelligent thing to do, right? So I had to borrow his coat, and he's like 6'4", 6'5", and this is like a huge tundra Arctic coat, whatever. And I'm like 5'10", 5'11", something like that. So I just look ridiculous in this massive fluffy coat. I look like a toddler. But I'm staring up at this bird, and I'm kind of shivering, bouncing up and down. I'm waiting for a flight shot or something, just some action to happen, like that happened with the photographers I mentioned previously. So I'm sitting there kind of trying to stay warm, and then the bird starts to preen, and then while it's preening, I got the first shot of it actually looking at me for the whole day. It wouldn't even look at you, right? But while it was preening, it kind of grabbed one of its feathers, and then it looked at me for like half a second, and then went back to scanning its surroundings. And I was like, okay, I got a shot of it looking at me, so I'm gonna bounce. I'm gonna get back in the car and warm up for a bit. I turn around and start walking away, and then I look back. I take a glance back over my shoulder, and it was doing that thing that owls do where they kind of like, and I guess raptors in general, when they're preening, they like bite their feet, like scratch their feet with their mouth or whatever. He was just sitting there munching on his toes, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cute, right? So I walked back over in this oversized, ridiculous coat, and then by the time I got back to the bird, it had stopped munching on its toes. It went back to normal. So I was like, crap, okay, well, I'll hang out for like 30 more seconds. I'm watching it, and then without warning, there was no head bob, no nothing. It just suddenly kind of looks down, flies off the telephone pole, dives directly at me, flies a little past me, so it's facing away, and then hovers over my head, probably 7 feet from me, for like 3 seconds straight. Just like a kestrel would. He's sitting there like a drone, just... I'm just sitting there watching this. My mouth is open. Like, this is just incredible. It's too close for photos anyway. Felix is watching it in the car. He's freaking out. And I'm expecting this bird to either dive into the snowbank after a prey item or to like turn around and go back to the telephone pole, which is what we've seen it do, throughout the day. But instead, it kind of slowly hovers down and just lands on this 3-foot tall post like 25 feet from me, right? 3 foot tall, like perfectly eye level. I'm losing my mind at this point, right? So I'm like hyperventilating, and I kneel down to get eye level with the bird to get a solid background on it and everything. And I start taking photos, and I'm getting some shots. It's not even looking at me. And then I take my phone out to get a cell phone video of it to prove like, hey, this actually happened. This was insane. I get the cell phone video, and I put the cell phone on the ground and made a little noise while I was putting it down. And then the bird kind of finally starts looking in my direction. And then it's looking at my phone. It's doing like a head tilt, going from side to side, all kinds of stuff, doing a little head wobble. And then it looks back at Felix, and it starts checking its surroundings again. And then it flew back up to the post. It was there for like a solid minute and a half maybe. And that was insane, right? To have such not only a rare bird, but an elusive bird. Like, we're not talking like some random passerine from like Europe. Like, this is like an owl, and they're barely ever seen in the Northeast. And to be able to have an encounter largely by myself with it at eye level on a post 25 feet away was one of the most insane wildlife encounters I've ever had. Definitely my favorite owl encounter. And, in the past, I was never a massive fan of northern hawk owls. Like, I liked them. I thought they were cool. But it was similar with like pygmy owls. Like I really didn't like pygmy owls until I saw one in Yellowstone and got to watch it hunt, and I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. Same deal here. Like northern hawk owls are up there as one of my favorites now, which might be a little bit of a recency bias, maybe just a tad. But it was like, I don't know how many months ago, like 4 months ago at this point. But yeah, that was incredible. Like I had so much fun with that bird. So yeah, I got some good flight shots. Actually, at one point it flew out over me and Felix again, went to go hunt something. I heard like a robin. I heard a robin alarm call or something, so I think it might have been going after a robin. Whatever it was, it turned around, starts flying back at me. I lost focus, unfortunately, so I got some flight shots. But then you just see this, my camera locks focus on the background. You just see this out of focus blur just getting bigger and bigger and bigger until suddenly my whole frame is just black, right? The bird's taking it up. So I put my camera down as this is happening because I'm like, okay, I can't get a shot. I want to see this happening, right? I want to see the bird actually flying. When I put my camera down, this thing, I kid you not, was like from the mic to my face. Okay, that doesn't help you guys because you can't see me, but like 2 feet away from me. Like I kid you not, I could have touched the bird if I reached my hand out easily. I wouldn't even had to have extended my arm all the way. And Felix can vouch for me. He saw it happen, right? He thought I actually didn't see it. He thought I was still looking through the camera viewfinder, and he's like, dude, it flew like 2 feet from your face. I'm like, I know. So that whole encounter was incredible. I had a lot of fun. I only went up to see it that once. And then I got caught in a blizzard on the way back down south. So I wasn't able to go to work the next day. But yeah, that was awesome. And then after that, nothing happened again for like a month. And there was this long-eared owl roost out where I live. And I didn't shoot it that much this winter, mainly because there's always a lot of people there. There was a lot of ethical drama around it 2 years ago or 3 years ago, something like that. So I was kind of not thrilled to go to that location. And when I did, it was mainly just for some birding stuff. Be like, okay, just to say I saw a long-eared owl, I'd come in for 5 minutes, take some shots, and leave. But one of the days, it was rainy. Like, it was bad weather. It was overcast and rain and kind of cold and blah. And I was like, there's probably not going to be anyone there. This long-eared owl is pretty chill. There's 2 of them. I know they're pretty chill. I think you'd be mistaken not to at least give one crack at this location, right? So I showed up. There's one dude there. And the dude, he was in the parking lot, and he was like, hey, do you know where the long-eared owls are? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll show you, because it's the one guy, and he didn't know where they were. So I'm like, I'll just, he's already here. I might as well show him, right? So I bring him up to the area where the roost is, and I see one of them moving, right? So I'm like, oh, yeah, there's one there right now. And he's like, oh, really? He gets all excited. I look away, I get my camera set up, and I look through my camera again, and it's just gone. I just don't see it. And, if you know long-eared owls, you know that they're very well camouflaged birds, right? They're really difficult to spot. So I'm assuming like, okay, maybe I'm just blind and this bird's still there. So I'm looking and we're chatting, and it's like 5 minutes go by and I'm not seeing this bird at all. So I tell him, I'm like, yo, follow me on Instagram so I can message you if I see it. I'm going to go to the back end of the roost and see if the bird's out, perching. And which shouldn't have happened because it was still like 30 minutes before sundown, and long-eared owls really don't fly prior to sunset in my limited anecdotal experience, right? Like I've seen a lot of long-eared owls before, but I've seen like 25, but all of them were really far away, and I wasn't able to stay till sunset. And the ones I was able to stay till sunset with, they flew like 20 minutes after the sun had gone down. It was way too dark to get shots or anything. So I'm assuming the bird's not back there, but I decided to go back to the back end of the roost to see if the bird is perched for hunting. And lo and behold, it's just there in the open. It's just sitting there. And since this thing had been so habituated to photographers over the course of the winter, it just didn't care, right? So I messaged the guy. I'm like, yo, like this bird's here. And then he comes around and it's kind of chilling. And we're the only people photographing it. A car came by and we had this thing where every time a car came by, I was like, just pretend we're talking. We're not seeing anything, right? Because I didn't want a huge crowd forming or anything. But eventually these 2 people came and they're like, have you guys seen the long-eared owls? And it seemed like they had driven a long way and there wasn't going to be a ton of people because it was raining once again. So I look at the guy and I'm like, okay, so the bird is perched like right there. Like you can see it. So go over to that parking lot and then come over. So they went and, they come over and we were watching this bird, and then it flew because it got flushed by a truck. A truck had driven under it, and the back end of the roost is on a road. So it flew, and I'm walking with this small group of people. It was a guy, his wife, or wife or girlfriend, and then the other guy that was first there. And I'm walking with him, I'm talking, and all of a sudden I see this bird on like a 4-foot tall pine tree just chilling. So I freak out. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's right there, right? So we started taking some photos. And then it flew to another perch, not away from us, kind of flew like just directly like perpendicular, and then tree topped on top of this tree like a great gray or a barred owl would, and was just sitting there perfectly in the open. And we were able to photograph it. It didn't care. It was just hunting. It was a really, really cool experience. And it was weird seeing their hunting behaviors because, when I give owl talks in the past and from what I've read, I thought that they had a short-eared owl style of hunting, or like a barn owl style of hunting, flying over large open areas and gliding and kind of using their facial disc to hear prey items and diving into the grass. And I'm still pretty sure that's what they do. But now I'm not entirely positive because, the times I've seen it, that time I saw it hunt, and then the subsequent times I've seen it hunt since then, they're not flying around in the open. They're just sitting there perched. And actually one night, it was another rainy night again. No one was there this time. It was perched up on a tree, way too dark to get shots, but I got to just watch it flutter down and crash into the grass. And it was a very interesting hunting style. So maybe I'll get somebody on who works with these birds and try to learn about how they hunt and things like that. But that was awesome. I got my first actual decent shot of long-eared owls, even though I've seen like a bajillion of them, right? Their photos are so difficult. So that was cool. Let me think. After that, I don't know if I got anything after that. I think the next thing that happened after was Florida. And Florida, man, dude, Florida is insane. I loved Florida. I had a blast there. And I went the first time, so I've been twice in the last 4 weeks, right? First time I went down to the Sarasota, Bradenton area, and this was my first time back in 9 or 10 years, right? I hadn't been back. I went to the Keys when I was a really young kid for like a weekend. But this is my first time back for a long time. And I was speaking at the FCCC, Florida Camera Club Council. It was like a conference down there. And I had a lot of fun. And I did 3 talks, right? So I did a talk on like shorebirds. I did a talk that just titled Art in the Wild, same as my podcast. But that was just about general wildlife photography improvement. And then I also gave a talk on how to find wildlife in an area that you've never been to before. And people seemed like they liked it. I mean, that was my first time giving it, right? It was interesting because, the conference is like, hey, we need like 3 talks from you. So I was like, okay, so here's my shorebirds, here's my art in the wild. I didn't do my owl talk because like 60% of the owls that I talk about in that talk are all like snowy owls or great gray owls or northern hawk owls or things that you find up north, right? So I was like, okay, that's not going to work. I had some other things that were more like geared towards general public and not necessarily photographers. So I was like, let me just make up one, right? So I'm really good I don't really hire guides. I don't go on workshops. I actually just went on my first workshop ever on my last trip to Florida last week. And so I don't really go on workshops or hire guides. I'm more of a go to a place and figure it out kind of person. And I've noticed I've gotten pretty good at that. Like I almost never go to a location and travel and then not get wildlife. Like that's very rare for me. And there's a bunch of different techniques and tools that I'll use and, outreach methods and stuff like that I use to find wildlife. So I was like, what if I just made this a talk? Right? So that was my first time ever giving that. And yeah, once again, people seemed like they liked it, seemed like it was helpful, right? So that was a lot of fun. And then I also ran a workshop down there too, which is my first time ever running a workshop. Also on shorebirds, right? So that was a blast. It was funny. So I was down there with Gary Farber from Hunts, right? And I brought him to the shorebird place I wanted to scout. And I had found the shorebird location online like 6 months before using some of the techniques that I talked about in my How to Find Wildlife class. But I found the location and I show up and dude, coming from the Northeast, right, where I just get like piping plovers and least terns and that's it. This place was like heaven. There was royal terns just on the beach, sandwich terns, I think. You had a forester tern, I think as well. You had laughing gulls. There's willets on the beach. Like we get willets where I live, but willets just aren't on the beach, right? So these guys are just hanging out in the surf. They'll let you walk right by them. There's some white ibis on the beach too. Like I was like blown away, right? And this is a pretty mild beach by Florida standards. That just goes to show how crazy of a place this is, right? But I'm calling my friends back home, and I'm kind of like low-key bragging a little bit. I'm like, dude, I've got this awesome setup right now. I've got like royal turns, and where the royal turns were positioned, they were right in front of a town, right? So when the lights turn on, there's artificial bokeh opportunities, and it's on the west coast of Florida, right? So the sun's setting over the water, so I was going to have perfect front lit portrait opportunities. The birds were constantly flying in, so I was going to have awesome flight shot opportunities, right? The whole thing was literally perfect, like as perfect as it can be for shorebirds. So I'm talking to my friends. I'm like, haha, imagine not being in front of a whole group of royal terns right now. Like, this is incredible. And I was waiting for the light to get better because the light was horrible, right? And if it had been like 30 more minutes, the light would have been shootable. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this toddler comes up. It's like 4-year-old and just barrels through the whole flock of birds, like full speed sprints. Me and Gary had been camped out here for like 45 minutes. This kid just comes through, flushes all of them, and then all the terns were just like, we're leaving now. So they went out to this sandbar that was like 500 yards out in the ocean that had just opened up, and the only birds that came back were the laughing gulls. So I'm sitting there like, wow, this is going to be an incredible night, to suddenly being like, okay, now I have to find something else to do. And I got some good stuff. Like, I landed some willet shots that were pretty nice, but nothing could compare to missing out on an entire an entire session with a whole group of royal terns in front of artificial bokeh and stuff like that. And then my friends were making fun of me after that happened, which is very deserved, to be honest. But yeah, so I ended up running my workshop at that location, had a lot of fun. It was different than I thought it was going to be. I felt like I was less involved than I thought I was going to have to be, right? In terms of like helping people and stuff like that. It was more, I was just kind of there for general assistance, and they were just kind of doing their thing. And I was calling out birds when they're flying in, or I was calling out camera settings as the lighting conditions changed. And then I was doing some, kind of showing them how to work with the behavior of shorebirds, particularly with willets, since they're a mobile species, right? Whereas like your terns are just kind of sitting in one place. The willets and sanderlings are working the shoreline, so I was kind of showing them how to navigate that situation, and it was a lot of fun. I had a blast. So the whole trip was incredible. I met a lot of awesome people. And yeah, I hope to go back to the area again at some point, because it was a lot of fun, And also, on one of the nights there, I pulled off the most technically difficult shot I've ever taken in my life. It might have been the last night I was down there in Florida, because I had another day and then I flew out later in the next day. But I think it was the last night I was there, and I was with Gary, right? And we were trying to photograph some shorebirds. I got some okay black skimmer stuff, but nothing I was super happy with. And we're about to leave, and it is dark, right? And I like shooting dark. I really like shooting dark, but we're talking like 40 minutes after sundown. So it is like too dark for me even. So we're walking out of the beach, and then I see these little shadows running around in the darkness, these little things. And I knew they're shorebirds, right? So I look through my camera, and the great thing about electronic viewfinders with the mirrorless cameras is you can actually see in the dark, like better than your eye. So I could identify these birds with the electronic viewfinder, and I see there's like ruddy turnstones, there's sanderlings, there's willets, but the big one was there were black-bellied plovers there. Not in breeding plumage, but they were there, right? And plovers are really easy to work with in low light conditions because they kind of just have a habit of staying still. Whereas like your sandpipers, like your sanderlings and stuff, they just won't stay still for anything. They're just sitting there with their heads bobbing, they're walking around. It's like infuriating. You can't shoot them with like below 200th of a second because they're constantly moving. But I see these plovers, and it's so dark. And I go to Gary, I'm like, hey, Gary, wouldn't it be like funny if I could pull a shot off in these conditions? And then I was thinking about it. At first it was supposed to be a joke, and my brain's like, no, you should go back to the hotel and like sleep because it's kind of getting late. It was like 8 something at this point. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I should give it a shot. So I go to Gary and I'm like, hey man, I am going to try to get this shot for only like 15 minutes. It'll be quick. Well, that 15 minutes turned into like 2 hours of laying on the beach. And what was happening was it was so dark. I had to be on a 2.5 second exposure, right? So this is a shot that I posted on my Instagram. The specific date is March 19th, right? So I had to be on a 2.5 second exposure to even have a shot at getting this image, right? And I had to be completely manual focus, all of these different elements. And what I ended up having to do was taking my camera and like burying it in the sand. I have this thing that I'll do where particularly when I'm shooting shorebirds, I'll make a mound of sand on the beach, and I'll take my lens hood and I'll shove it into the sand until it's lined up with the bird. And it's almost like a sandbag that you put on your window, but better. It's more stabilized, and you can just shoot as long as the shutter speed you want. And when you have it set up like that, obviously you're burying your camera in the sand, which is less than ideal. And I did catch a lot of flack from other photographers when I posted a video of me doing that on my story, but it was worth the shot, But yeah, so I was sitting there, and it was, I'm taking the shot, and it's 2.5 seconds, right? And every time I took it, I'm saying to Gary, I'm like, oh, I definitely got it that time, for sure. Like, I got this. And then the shutter would open back up. It would go black for the 2.5 seconds. It would open back up, and then I would see the bird had moved completely, or I had accidentally nudged the camera, or all of these different things. But after 2 hours, I was able to get like 2 or 3 images that were passable. They definitely needed some post-processing, but I edited them up, and I actually was happy enough with them to post them, right? And it was cool because I got some artificial bokeh in the background, and it was like actually straight up nighttime. Like, this was my first time really shooting at night, because 2 hours after sundown, you're talking, it's not even like blue hour anymore. It's just night. But yeah, so I was really happy with those shots. That was a really fun story. And that's all that happened in Florida pretty much for my first time. But yeah, that was incredible. I had a lot of fun at the conference. It was a great event. There was a lot of cool people that were there, a lot of cool speakers and stuff like that. And then I came back from Florida. What did I do after that? Pretty much immediately after I came back from Florida, I started filming more episodes. I filmed my recap episode. And then I filmed an episode with Matt Bruce. And then the next thing that happened after that was the eclipse in Vermont, right? So a friend of mine, Tobias Yoder, he's in Texas, right? And they did have totality in Texas, but he saw that there was going to be a possibility of clouds. So last minute, he's like, screw this, I'm flying to the Northeast, right? So he posts on his story saying like, yo, does anyone know good birding spots in this area? And I reached out to him like, dude, if you're coming out here, like, let's meet up. Because I saw him in 2022 in Alaska. I was up with him and some other photographers for a week up there shooting bears and stuff like that. So he came out, and he was able to pull a shot off with a bird and the eclipse. I was not able to. I came close with a vulture, but it didn't work out. But that whole encounter, dude, the eclipse was insane. And I actually don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself too much, because my last 2 episodes I recorded, I talked with the guests about it, but it was easily the coolest non-wildlife related encounter I've ever had in my life. I mean, the photos, I've said this a million times on the last 2 podcasts I recorded, even though you'll be hearing those in a few weeks. But the photos just can't do it justice. It was such an alien experience, like the whole area. It was weird because, you could notice it was getting a little darker as totality came along, but even up to like 99%, it was still like daytime. Like, the sun was still out. It was just kind of weird. It looks like you just took the brightness the brightness setting on your iPhone and turned it down a bit, and then totality came and it just went dark. It was just dark. I mean, it wasn't like pitch black, it wasn't nighttime, but it was really dark, and all the animals freaked out, right? The nocturnal species, like the spring peepers, they just started calling like crazy. They just erupted, and all the birds freaked out and started flying around. And I'm just looking up at this, at the eclipse, and it was just so cool. I mean, yeah, it was incredible. And I got some shots that were cool, right? I mean, it's the eclipse, but it's the same, white circle on a black background that everybody else got. So I didn't end up like posting them on my feed or anything, but yeah, that was an exceptional experience. And it was funny, there was a vulture that I almost got a shot of, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago. It was flying directly towards the eclipse, and I started running towards it, right? Because it was coming up my way. I was just on this random road in the middle of nowhere, completely alone. Tobias was down like a couple hundred yards in a marsh trying to photograph some herons, right? But I was running towards the bird, and then the bird was coming in my direction, and it was, you could see the totality, like the shadow, what I'm talking about? You could see that off in the distance racing towards me. So I could see the end of the eclipse coming, and I was praying that this bird was going to just stay in line, and I would have been able to shoot it with the eclipse, but it peeled off last second and I couldn't. So yeah, but I am looking at 2026. There's going to be one in Spain at horizon level, another solar eclipse. So that's something I am looking at as another possibility. But yeah, that was a cool trip. I met this guy on Instagram too. His tag is Natural Selections, and I've been following him for like a while, right? So I've been following him for like a year and a half maybe, and he'd been following me for around the same amount of time. And I'm at this random bog in the middle of Vermont. I've never been here before. I just saw it on eBird, and then somebody else on an Alaska trip had recommended it to me. So I was like, okay, I'll go check it out. I run into this other young photographer, and we're talking for like like 5 or 10 minutes, something like that. And then I'm like, yo, let me get your Instagram, right? Because I like connecting with other young photographers and stuff. And he's like, yeah, and he gives me he asked for what mine was, right? So I told him, he types it in, he goes, oh dude, I'm already following you. And then I'm like, oh, well, what's your tag? I'm expecting it to be some like random photographer or something like that. And he's like, oh, Natural Selections. And it was so weird seeing a person, like meeting a person you've known on the internet in person in and of itself is strange, right? Like when I went to Alaska, I met a bunch of people like, like Preston, Tobias, Cameron Darnell, Luca, like all these different people, right? And I've known them forever. And it was weird seeing them in person because like, oh, wow, these are like actual people and not just icons on the screen. But meeting somebody in person that you've known for a while online when you weren't expecting it is way more weird. It was kind of crazy. But yes, that was really cool. We talked for like maybe an hour or so. And then that was pretty much the end of my eclipse trip. I didn't really get a lot of shots of wildlife on that trip, but I did find some spots I'm going to have to go back up and check on. Then after that was my last trip to Florida, I think. Yeah, so after that was my last trip to Florida last week. I went on a Charles Glatzer workshop, which was a lot of fun. And dude, this place is ridiculous, man. It's called the Alligator Farm. And it's actually like, it's like a zoo, right? I'd say specializing in crocodilians, like that's kind of, it seems like mainly that's what they focus on. They did have some random stuff like lemurs and some other bird species and whatever, a sloth or something. And I'm not like a huge zoo guy. Like I don't really photograph at zoos. They're cool to go to if it's an ethical one, right? But I'm not really huge on photographing the animals in there. But the thing is, they have this big gator pond, right? This huge swamp with a bunch of captive gators in it. And since there's such a high concentration of gators, there's no raccoons or weasels or any kind of egg predators that could make it into this area and climb up the trees. So a bunch of wild birds actually come down and nest in these trees right along the boardwalk. And like, I'm talking crazy birds like tricolored herons, roseate spoonbills, snowy egrets, little blue heron, all this kind of stuff. And I didn't really know what to expect when I showed up to this place. I thought it was going to be like pretty cool. I was like, whatever. I get around, I take this bend in the boardwalk, and I just see like hundreds of waders just lining the trees along the boardwalk. And then I was like losing my mind from that point on. And like tricolored herons are like my favorite wader. And there was literally tricolored heron nests 6 inches off the boardwalk. Like you could, and they didn't care either. They're so used to people. You could just sit there and stare at them, get a cell phone shot of them, and they would just stare at you and then go back to sleep. And the funny thing is I brought a 40 millimeter macro lens down, and I was like, and just in case I need to use it, I always like to have a wide angle on me. Well, I was finally faced with a situation where I would need that wide angle. So I took the wide angle and I threw it on my camera. And I knew it had some focusing issues going into it, right? Like I knew it had some issues autofocusing, but I was like, hey, if push comes to shove, I will just manual focus, right? So automatically off the bat, autofocus does not work, right? It worked like for 2 seconds and then just stopped. So I'm like, okay, so I'll just switch to manual focus. We're chilling. So I do the zoom in thing that you can do on the electronic viewfinder. I don't know how it is for other cameras, but on the Z9, you can double tap and zoom in and kind of see a closer cropped version of what you see through the viewfinder. And that really helps me with manual focusing because you can really see when your shot is in focus, right? So I do the double zoom in thing and I start turning the manual focus wheel, and then it just doesn't work. It just stopped. Like, so there's no autofocus or manual focus on this lens. So the thing is effectively useless, right? And I'm surrounded by birds that are like 5 to 10 feet from me, and I'm stuck on a 500 millimeter prime the whole time, which honestly wasn't that bad. I got some headshots that I was super happy with. Like, it was a blast. But next time I go there, I'm definitely gonna bring like a 70 to 200. I'm gonna bring like an entire arsenal, of lenses and cameras, because there's so many things you could do with those birds. And then the Charles Glatzer workshop was really cool overall. I would totally recommend it. If you ever find yourself, looking at doing one of his workshops, especially this one. It was a technical series, right? So it was like basically it'd be a morning shoot, and then a presentation, and then lunch, and then some more presentations, and then an afternoon shoot. And I learned a bunch of cool stuff. Particularly, honestly, this is a super small detail, but for me, having the your histogram in your viewfinder, setting it up that way and paying attention and making sure you're not clipping your highlights is going to be a massive thing that helps me in the future, because I have an issue with that where I'll kind of clip the highlights. So he kind of walked us through utilizing the histogram when you're photographing and how to make sure you're not clipping the blacks and not clipping the highlights. And I was actually able to put that in use while shooting a backlit tricolored heron, right? So that was a lot of fun. The whole trip was a blast, and it was weird because it was like 4 days at the same location every day, right? Sunrise and sunset. So I wasn't able to go around and like explore, but honestly, I didn't need to, because the place was so insane that I was just going out and one-upping my shots from the previous session every single time. So I'm probably gonna do a revamp on my website here in a couple days. And my waiter section is going to be strong now, because the the amount of heron and egret headshots I have is just illegal. It's crazy. But yeah, so Florida is wild. I'd probably not move down there, I don't think. I know a lot of people who move down there, and I'm more of a cold weather person, right? I like the mountains and stuff like that, but I see the appeal. Like, it is a super nice place. Oh boy. And then I had this Uber dude. Oh my gosh. So, okay. Little backstory. I'm 21, right? So I just turned 21 too. So getting a rental car is a pain in the ass. Like, a lot of places don't even allow you to get one until you're 25. However, even if you can, like, the fees are just, it's just a lot more expensive. So I elected to Uber, since like my hotel was like 16 minutes from the place, and then maybe I would need an Uber to like a grocery store or something. So I was just doing Uber. And so we were supposed to meet up at the spot at 6:30. Well, 7 a.m. was when we were supposed to meet up, but it sounds like 6:45 was when we were really supposed to meet up. And I know people were going to start getting there at 6:30. So I was like, I want to be there at 6:30, squared away, all put together, good first impression, right? So I call my Uber, and it says they're going to be there at 6:40. They're going to get me there at 6:40. I'm like, okay, 6:40 is fine. It's still a good chunk before 6:45. So I'm looking at, I'm looking at my phone, right? I'm just on other apps and not really paying attention to Uber. And, eventually I swipe back over to Uber to check on how close my driver is. And, if you've used it, you have the little GPS and you have the little tiny car icon, and you can see how close they are to getting you and all that stuff. Well, I see the car hasn't moved. It's just sitting at a 7-Eleven. It just has not budged 1 inch, right? And by this time, 7 minutes have gone by, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of weird. So eventually they make their, they start moving. They start making the way towards me, and they pick me up. And now it's saying like 6:47, 6:48 is when I'm going to get there, right? And she was a nice lady, but she picks me up, and I'm like, okay, 6:47, 6:48, we're still doing pretty good. And then we're driving down the road, and I'm talking to her, and then she misses a turn. Now it's saying 6:52. And I'm like, okay, we are starting to cut it a little close, but we're fine. We're chilling. And then we're 3 minutes out from the location. And I'm once again, she's just a nice lady. I'm sure she was just having an emergency or something, but she just goes, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do this, but I really need to go to the bathroom. And then she pulls into a gas station, and she goes to the bathroom for like 15 minutes. So I'm just sitting in the back of her car, and I'm like, bro, what is going on right now? And I'm calling Gary, because Gary kind of helped me get involved in get me situated with the workshop and everything. And I'm trying to explain to him the situation, but I just start laughing because the whole thing was too ridiculous. So he can't really understand what I'm saying, right? And eventually the lady comes out, right? And it was funny too, because I also got this call from like an Uber emergency helpline because they noticed I was stopped for that long. So she comes out, we start driving again, and I'm already late by this time. It's past 7. I'm like, this is great. But then we get to a drawbridge and there's a sailboat and we get caught at the drawbridge. So it's like another 5 minutes of waiting at the drawbridge. So yeah, I got there at like 7:15. And it's tough because you have to be like, oh, my Uber, blah, 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 blah. But still, ultimately, it's your fault because you should have just scheduled earlier. But I couldn't have anticipated that was going to be a disaster. I don't know. Yeah, so that was funny. That was actually my first kind of bad encounter I've ever had with Uber. Like, I've been using Uber for a long time, especially when I was out in college in Montana. I was using it a lot. But yeah, that was funny. What else happened? Oh gosh, my second flight back from Florida, I botched that big time. That was a disaster. That's a different story for a different day. I'm not even gonna go over that right now. But yeah, so that was last week. So we are pretty much caught up. How long is this? Oh my gosh, I've been talking for 46 minutes. That's wild. Anyways, yeah, so that's pretty much what I've been doing. So right now I'm currently just focused on more consistency in terms of the podcast, and in terms of my photography, things like building my personal brand, and then some photography and videography related projects that I've wanted to execute for a long time that I want to kind of get rolling. But yeah, so hope you guys liked my rant, my 50-minute rant about what I've been doing. The next episode is going to be with Matt Bruce. I've already recorded and edited that. Then I have, I believe after him, it's Kiara Talia. That was a really good episode. It's like 2 hours long, so that's going to be a fun one. I always like those long episodes if it's a really good discussion. And then I just recorded one literally like 45 minutes ago with a friend of mine, Phil, and I met him in Alaska on that same trip that I was with Tobias on a couple years ago. So we talked about some golden-cheeked warbler conservation stuff, so that was a lot of fun. And then I've got one scheduled about social media for Saturday. So yeah, but hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys are excited. My DMs are open for ideas on what to do with this. I mean, what I really want to do is find a way to make this podcast unique, because there's other wildlife photography podcasts, right? I find that there's like not a bajillion of them, and if they do start up, they kind of die off pretty quickly, like this one almost did. But so there are some of them, and like, yeah, people do like to listen. They'll listen to multiple podcasts that are more or less the same, just because they like the different hosts and personalities. But I would like to make this different, not just in terms of the topics that I cover. That is one thing I want to strive for, but I also want to differentiate this in terms of the medium, right? Find some way to make it a little different. So I'm going to be working on that. But if you have any ideas on topics or constructive criticism, or hell, even unconstructive criticism, I don't know, just send that my way. But yeah, so I hope you guys are excited. I'm excited too, and I will see you on the next episode.